The Justice Department partially released the affidavit in the FBI search at former President Donald Trump's Florida home. The document is heavily redacted and alleges Trump took highly classified records from the White House. We spoke with John Ratcliffe about the affidavit and his experience with Trump as the government's top intelligence official, the Director of National Intelligence. A short time ago, the affidavit in the Mar-a-Lago search was partially unsealed in a Florida court. What's your assessment of the document?
Well, as expected, it was heavily redacted in places. I think it provided a general recitation of the fact that the FBI and the Department of Justice believed that there were classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. But I didn't really see anything in the affidavit that justified what still seems like an extreme approach by the FBI and the Department of Justice to retrieve those documents if, in fact, they were classified.
So what you haven't seen, a lot of it's redacted, but what you didn't see here was sort of what was that catalyst or this sense of urgency to take that unprecedented step to search a former president's private residence?
Right. I mean, I think there's nothing in there that is really going to tamp down the tensions that are running so high in this country with the American people about whether or not this was justified. I think one of the unfortunate things about the FBI and the Department of Justice approach here, Catherine, is, if you set out to, deepen divisions between, Americans and to increase a level of skepticism or distrust of the FBI and the Department of Justice, then they succeeded.
At the end of the administration, were there priority records for declassification?
Yes, I recall, meetings and discussions about records that still had not yet been declassified, and there was a process to go through that. And my understanding was that the president, before leaving office, signed off on that, and that those were left with the Department of Justice, again, to put the appropriate markings on, to have those records, declassified and made public. And my understanding is that that's either not been done or that order was reversed by President Biden. I'm not certain. And
again, these are related to the FBI Russia investigation known as Crossfire Hurricane.
Yes.
Okay. As the top intelligence official for then President Trump, describe the declassification process. Was it done by the book?
Well, yes. It's a pretty short book when it comes to the president's ability to declassify. The president is the ultimate classification and declassification authority. And the process is as simple as him saying, I want this declassified. And then, others need to carry that out, to take the appropriate steps to remove personal identifying information or put appropriate markings on or those kinds of things. But what people need to understand, Catherine, is the Constitution vests all power in the executive branch in the president.
Do you think any of these Russia records ended up at Mar-a-Lago?
I don't know. I don't have any insight into the records that were at Mar-a-Lago. I didn't play any role in that process. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if there were records related to that there, but that is just speculation. I don't have personal knowledge about what may or may not have been at Mar-a-Lago.
As the nation's top intelligence official in the fall of 2020, was there any intelligence that Hunter Biden's laptop was part of a Russian information operation?
No. I spoke pretty clearly, unequivocally about this at the time, Catherine. I put out a statement in October when the story about Hunter Biden's laptop broke, and there were certain political figures that said that was a part of a Russian disinformation campaign, a smear campaign against Joe Biden, straight from the Kremlin. And when I heard that, I knew that it was not true. Then I think, the American people have now seen what I knew at the time, which was there was a serious federal investigation into Hunter Biden at that time. We didn't talk about it publicly because we didn't want to prejudice his rights. to due process and ultimately a fair trial if he is to be charged. But it was very clear that the laptop was real. It was not part of a Russian disinformation campaign, and the American people, I think, very clearly know that now.
Just to follow up on that, at that time, more than 50 former senior intelligence officials described it as having the earmarks of a Russian information operation, and you thought, what?
It seemed decidedly political, and I don't know, who orchestrated that or coordinated that. But I do think an investigation into that is appropriate because, Catherine, that's election influence.
When you left government in January of 2021, what did the intelligence show about the origins of COVID-19?
Well, the intelligence showed a lot more than I'm allowed to still talk about publicly because, when it comes to, we talk about protecting sources and methods, it's somewhat limited when it comes to our intelligence capabilities against the Chinese Communist Party. And so I want to continue to preserve that. So I've seen a lot more information than the public has. There's much that has not been declassified about the origins of COVID-19 because it might jeopardize our ability to, determine other information about the Chinese Communist Party, what they may plan to do with Taiwan and things like that. But let me just say this, as the person that had the most access to the most intelligence, in the intelligence community, we talk about degrees of confidence, low degree of confidence, moderate degrees of confidence, high degrees of confidence. I had a high degree of confidence that the origins of COVID-19 were in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, I was the top intelligence official. That was my opinion.
A year earlier, scientists condemned as conspiracy theories anything suggested that COVID-19 did not have a natural origin. Had the science or the intelligence changed?
Yeah, so when I became DNI, I said, show me all the intelligence that says that. And Catherine, we have zero intelligence at that point, and there's still zero intelligence that points to a natural emergence of this. So it's been now almost 3 years since COVID-19 was first identified, and there's never been an intermediary host identified.
On January 6th, as a member of the Trump cabinet, are you aware of any formal or informal discussions to invoke the 25th Amendment after the Capitol riots?
I hadn't at the time, and I still haven't, but the idea that there was a cabinet-wide discussion about this where it was seriously entertained, it just didn't take place.